Billow Kerrow is a political economist and is a friend with the numbers, and he's in the hot seat this morning. Billow, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
How are you doing?
Generally fine.
Generally. And if we go specific? The devil is in the details, as they say, and that'll come into play, that's for sure. Welcome.
Thank you.
To the hot seat. We are in a different country, and... well, actually, I'm saying we're in a different country. That could have so many meanings. But literally, geographically, for the proverb perspective, we're in a different country this week. Dennis is going to share that with you, and then we want you to interpret the proverb for us.
There you go.
Today, Billow, we are in Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. It's an interesting country. It is a country that is surrounded by South Africa, and one of the greatest things that stands out about Eswatini is the fact that it is one of the countries in Africa that has absolute monarchy, still has a king and the leadership and everything. And every December and January, there is a spiritual moment where the king goes in to just cement his authority as the spiritual leader of the kingdom. And an interesting country to visit. Perhaps they have an interesting culture. Yes.
That selection.
Selection that takes place. Now, the proverb today: a man shows his character by what he laughs at. A man shows his character by what he laughs at. What do you make of that?
Wow. It's interesting. Well, if you are... I don't know whether it's similar to the English proverb. Show me your friends and I'll tell you who you are. Sounds a bit close to that, but what I get from that is that there are people who take certain situations. The way you take situations depends on the way you react to it. Your reaction tells you what you think, or what you think of some situations. When there's a serious matter and someone is, I think your reaction kind of tells people who you are really in terms of your understanding, your character or your knowledge. I think this is probably what it means. I don't know.
Yeah. Pretty much your silence that does not really bring out who you are. The moment you open up, especially to comment on something, then we can form a basis to say you belong this side. Well put.
Indeed. We're in a finance season. Proper. Some of us sometimes forget that the budget process starts at the end of August, and then brings us
9 months process.
9-month process, right? Brings us to right about this time where then the elements of the finance bill are then brought out, and then we go into a series of public participation, which we are currently in.
Keeping us busy these days, every Kenyan, literally.
Yeah, and that is a practice. It's been happening.
Yeah.
But in 2024, probably historically, is the first time that it was then put out on a large national scale, and by virtue of that, on an international scale, a global scale as well. And then we saw after that there was this renaissance, essentially, where everybody wanted to know, to a clear understanding, what happens with the country's resources, how they will be spent, where they will be gotten from, how much tax you will be subjected to, what projects the government is involved in. Everybody wants to know, whether it is the person who is sweeping or the person who's sitting in their luxury vehicle, across board, cutting across social strata. Everybody wants to know what is going on. Brings us 2025, whereby it would appear as though folks have been a little bit more careful in terms of what goes into the finance bill, or have they? And I guess that's the question we start. Yes. Or have they been smarter?
Yeah.
Or have they hidden things in plain sight? And so that's what we want to open up today. Of course, we're coming off the place where people have tried to explain what the finance bill actually is presenting for Kenyans this time round, and we've ended up in court behind bars. But we're going to do it a little bit more today and have we gotten to a place whereby now the finance bill is protecting or injuring Kenyans? Billow?
These days, everyone I see, including even people working in my business, the first thing they ask is, what is in the finance bill this time? Everyone is so keen about it. After last year, it has really broadened the understanding of what all these things are about, and people want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
But there are two aspects. If you look at finance bill, there are two issues I think that I want to bring out. One, the government's perspective. For the government, it's always about the revenue. That's what the finance bill is about. How do you raise revenue? Additional revenue for running the government, to meet the additional expenditure. That's as far as the government is concerned. Nothing else. The rest is all, a story on, policies, on how to do this and how to generate that. But for the businesses, for instance, and the public, it's not about the revenue. It's about what is the impact of finance bill on your cost of living. What is the impact on your life? And that's the aspect that we are looking at when we are looking. So the two are that's why the two are always at odds. The government wanted to raise revenue, and Kenyans are looking at what is the impact on my life. And that is the part that the government doesn't want to bring out always, the impact of the finance bill. So if you look at finance bill generally, any time, including this one, to answer your question, simply put, it would injure, of course, because it would affect your life adversely, because it would affect your cost of living. That there's no doubt about it. Even this one, which many people would look at it and say, no, this is not as bad as last year.
Yeah.
There are no new taxes. And, you look at those are the terms the government used when the CS was discussing this a couple of months ago. Said no new taxes on this one. You not find them. But at the end of the day, when you play smart, that's the way. Let me put it that way. Then the devil is in the details. You'll find that some of the measures that they have taken would obviously have a significant impact on the lives of Kenyans, on the cost of living. But the simple reason that you want to raise additional revenue, however small it is, means you have to get some more taxes.
Right.
From that finance bill. That's basically what it means. That simply put, and there's no doubt that the fact that it is there means you have to raise some revenue, and they're going to raise some revenue, and it's going to have an impact here.
Okay, is it possible to do this? The word progressive is put behind other jurisdictions, whereby progressive means that your economy is moving forward, it's thriving, and at the same time you're able to take care of the livelihoods of people, whereby they don't feel the pinch as much, on one hand. And then number two, there's actual visible, tangible manifestation of what these taxes are actually doing. So is it possible then to have a tax regime in place that does the things that they are needed, whereby the people are taken care of?
Look at it this way. There's no time in the history of this country Kenyans have said we don't want to pay taxes. Kenyans have been paying taxes. In fact, we pay, and I've always repeated this, we pay the highest amount of tax in the whole of East and Central Africa, more than all of these African countries combined. I mean, there's no doubt that we have no objection to paying, and Kenyans are paying taxes. The question is this tax working for you? And is it being done in a manner that really helps the economy also grow and also have money? You have some money in your pocket and meet your cost of living and so forth. No, those are the challenges. That the way the government has looked for taxes in this country has let me use the word, has become punitive. Really, I mean you're looking at, we must raise revenue. You're not looking at other aspects of the action. For example, that people need to have some money. They need to have some disposable income. They need to, you've got school fees to pay. You have got so many other things you need to do. So it's not all about giving money to government and government working for you. I need to do some things myself. So I think there's something about, if you look at our constitution, that talks to the burden of tax. That cautions is one of the principles in public finance, that it should not be a burden on society. Governments, yes, have the powers through the parliament to tax, But they don't have absolute power to tax the way they want. It's up to the people through their representatives to determine how much money you want to give to government to do whatever we want. The rest we want to keep. I mean, we want to do our own things.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's the concept. But where Parliament then loses that, and executive also loses that, then it appears that we are the ones who know what is good for you.
Yeah.
Bring the money.
So
I think that is where the trouble we are in now, where the government thinks they have a monopoly of ideas. They determine your life, and they're the ones who decide what to do, and they tell give us all the taxes, collect more taxes. So every year you're increasing 300, 400, 500 billion, in your expenditures.
yeah, Kerrow, you've mentioned something that is very critical in the sense that whenever we look at a finance bill, there is always the aspect of raising more taxes and the impact that would have on the people, and that the government would never want to share this information on the impact that additional revenue, additional taxes would have on a common mwananchi. Is it about time that the government finally started having honest and open conversations with Kenyans so that we all can agree? Because like you've said, Kenyans have never said we do not want to pay taxes. We want to have honest conversations so that we all agree on how we move forward. Is it about time?
No, but you remember when this administration came in, there was a lot of talk about why don't we have a conversation on these things? Why don't we have a national, gathering of Kenyans to discuss the economy, so that we actually decide what is that we want, because you want to grow some aspects of the economy, but when you put taxes, it's really pushing down that aspect of that sector of the economy. And there's many examples of the economy. Where does tax come from? It's from businesses. People have to make an earning. If you have level of earning, if your income is going to be affected, you can't do business. You shut down. Today I was reading in one of the media that NSF complaining that in the last 2-3 years, up to nearly 500 employers who are paying contributions, for the employees shut down. I mean, it's. But when you look at the statistics, they'll tell you millions of companies have shut down in the last 5-6 years. So the thing is, there's need to have that. But I don't think the government, this one and any other, would be willing to discuss that, because they know that the bottom line means they would be stopped from doing certain things. But that conversation is available every day through our representatives in Parliament. Every day is available to them. But that's the challenge we have, that Parliament is not really putting its foot down and saying, no, this is not good for our people. You saw it in the finance bill, where things were, there are measures that were specifically hurting a particular MP and his farmers and his own electorates, and they went ahead and still voted for it. And later saying, oh, sorry, we had to.
Where do you see this going, Kerrow? Because there's one part is, this is what we are proposing in the budget. The other conversation is, this is the impact of that proposal. What then you're saying is, on this other side, they don't want us to talk about the impact. And you look at the case of Rose Njeri. She was using her skills to try to educate the public through civic education, using a platform that is free for everyone, that, hey, look, this is what is contained in this. And very quickly, 3, rejection of Section A, Part 1 of the first schedule, which talks about zero-rated status for essential goods. And she is actually then saying this is going to increase the cost of living, especially for low-income households. And you go on and so forth. So where do you see this going? Because all of a sudden, there's this interest into the finance bill like we've never had before.
There's no two ways about it. Kenyans have to continuously speak about this matter. There's no other way about it. You must continuously talk about it and agitate for change on some of these things. Because the government would obviously want you to keep quiet, and they introduce the taxes, and people pay taxes and suffer. They don't really think about anything else. But there's also what used to happen in the good old days. Yeah, let me use the word, the good old days. Government used to engage with various sectors of the economy. It used to be, budgeting used to be a serious business. To do a finance bill was a very complicated thing for a finance minister in the old days, before up to around 2013. Before 2013, let me put it that way. It was not an easy thing, because you had to balance between the interest of the businesses, the farmers, the public, and all those things. They had to really weave their way through to find out how to get some little income to try and balance their budget. But nowadays, it's become, it's shocking. You just sit in the office and say, 5% on this, 15% on this, 16%.
Let's get what we can.
Let's get what we can. And completely disregard all the submissions. And you saw it in 24. Hundreds of institutions submitted. Thousands and thousands of submissions were made. And they just pushed aside and they went ahead with whatever they had. And that's the sad thing. But that's the way things are supposed to be. That engagement is critical in any country. That's what they do. I mean, you must talk to a sector and tell them, look, you are in fertilizer, we are in famine. We want to remove fertilizer from zero rating to exempt from your sector. What do you think would be the impact? You talk to the people who are in that industry, in the farming sector and so forth.
They are actually the ones
who would then tell the government, look, if you do that, there would be no impact. We are not going to pass that cost, and there will be no impact. Then the government say, okay, then perhaps we can introduce this, or they'll tell you no. The moment you remove that, and we can't claim that VAT, there's going to be a 16% increase in the cost of fertilizer. And then they say, okay, maybe we'll need to look for something else. But if you don't engage, and you just sit down and, in Treasury and come up with something, and then you go around to the public and say, what do you think? And whatever we think is, again, not...
really doesn't matter. So, Billow, we're saying that essentially public participation can actually be beneficial to government. It is not necessarily just to hear the views of the people and then put it in a box and put it onto the table.
Oh, yes.
But you can actually use this for this progressive economy that we are talking about.
Exactly.
The practitioners in the industry can tell you, look, if you taxed here and not
impact.
here, this will be the impact.
Exactly.
So it can actually happen
and
in that manner.
If you look at the submissions, for example, by the sector, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, they actually tell them exactly what the impact of every measure that has been proposed in the finance bill is going to be, and then when they disregard it, a year later, 2 years later, and they see the impact, then they start backtracking. You remember that thing, for example? Let me give you a good example. The 17% import, tax that they introduced on importing and construction materials like cement and so forth, and clinker and those things, and they said we want to encourage local whatever. And they were told, look, we don't have capacity. There was a meeting that was held a couple of years earlier that was agreed that a timeline by which we will be self-sufficient in our own clinker production and so forth and so forth. And the government ignored all that, and they said, no, we're going to introduce 16. If you import any of those, penalty, 17% on that. 2 years later, they were told the impact on the cost of your construction, on the building sector, on business in general, in that whole sector, they saw it. They started backtracking. Now I think they're proposing it should be reduced to 5%. So sometimes they're given all this information, and it's not that people don't want to pay. I keep repeating this, but the government is being told this is the impact of your action on the economy, and the same economy that you want to generate income taxes from. Because if you affect my business, how will I generate more taxes? I'll give you, for example, the sector I'm in. Vegetable in the cooking oil sector. The amount of taxes we pay if you import 1 ton of crude palm oil or crude vegetable oil is up to 31% of the cost. 31% on at the port of Mombasa. That's what
to bring it in,
including taxes and levies. Yes, taxes, duty 10% plus all those other things, railways and whatever, levy and everything, VAT. And so when you find that product sold now, all that cost
is transferred.
Plus another 16% on it, that VAT that you're going to charge again. So you get into a situation where nearly 40-50% of your cost on a product that is basic, essential, it's because of the taxes. And this, I keep saying, countries like, go to Ethiopia, go to Egypt. Some of these countries, they don't, on basic essential commodities, they simply do not even tax it because they want the cost of living to be low. Even if you don't have a job, you should be able to have some bread on the table or something on the table to eat. That's the way they look at it.
There's an argument that I've had. This is the argument now from this other side. You look at our economy. 80% of Kenya's economy is from the informal sector. So when you're doing tax proposals, the idea then is effectively you'll broaden the tax base, which essentially is going to stifle these small businesses or sectors. How then do you balance? Because this is 80%. So the bulk of what you're going to get is coming from these 80%. So in order for you to generate, you have to stifle. So there is that question of you have to. How do they balance this?
And no, it's not. Look, we we know that 80% of the people in this country survive on subsistence, what we call informal economy, but basically what you're saying is the subsistence farmer, or people are surviving on their own, self-employed on the farms, and so low an income that you cannot even think of introducing some of the taxes that ideally would be compared to other developed countries like America, where that kind of SMEs or that kind of informal sector is very small. It's less than 10%. But at the same time, if you look at the level of taxes that are collected in UK and in US, the percentage of the population who pays taxes, compare also with Kenya, the difference is not very huge. I was just looking at, for example, in UK, it's about 50, less than 50% of the population. And then you look at Kenya, they want to push it to 30-something percent. And, it's over 30-something percent. And this is a country where over 80% of the people are not people who can generate enough income to pay this form of tax or that form of tax. So to answer your question, I think, you see, you do not kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. Yeah. The 20% of the outside the informal, the 20% is the one that generates all the income, for example, from which the government generates most of its taxes. These are the employees in the formal sector. These are the people in manufacturing sector, people in big businesses. These are the people who generate most of the taxes. And so when you broaden, if the idea of broadening, when we came up with VAT in just around Kibaki's time, in the beginning of just before Kibaki's time, but one of the policies Kibaki came up with was that, look, direct taxes, which are income tax on your salary, on your earnings, profit, and so forth, are very difficult to collect. And one, it also has significant impact on your cost of living and so forth. So he came up with, and it's a bit of a imbalance. It creates a bit of unfairness because only those who are earning will pay. Yes. So they came up with a policy that let us expand on indirect taxes, the taxes which everybody can pay. This is VAT. Yes. Value taxes. So they introduced VAT on virtually everything. Right. So even if I am not somebody who is working, if I go and buy a bottle of water, I'm paying 16% tax. If I buy my pencil for the school, even your kid at home, he's got VAT, he's paying tax. So that way, there's some sort of fairness, and everyone is paying taxes. So, but the issue is that's why I keep saying the issue then is not about the paying. Paying, everyone is paying tax. The issue is how much do you want? How much should you collect? How much is enough? I mean, so you keep saying every year, increase it by another 500 billion, increase by another 500 billion. Today, our expenditure is 4.2 trillion. I mean, it's crazy. It's $40 billion. Just go and add up all the expenditure budgets for Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, all of them combined. It will be less than the 40 billion.
And Kerrow,
one country.
Yeah, and Kerrow, there is the aspect of the government wanting to increase taxes. Then there is the aspect of deficit that is there, which then pushes the government to go into borrowing. And you look at, if I look at just the summary of the bill, the fiscal deficit in the financial year 2025-2026 will be financed by net external financing of 284.2 billion shillings, and in the domestic market 591.9 billion shillings. Just what does that do to the manufacturing sector, to those who want to go get loans for them to be able to push their business? How does that affect the economy in terms of growing if the government itself is going into the domestic market to borrow?
What is debt? In public sector, debt simply means accumulation of the deficits, budget deficits. So when you do a budget like this one, your proposed expenditure is 4.2 trillion, and your estimated revenue, you're saying, is going to be 3.3 or something. Yes, close to that, 3.3 trillion. So you're saying I have a deficit of approximately 900 billion. That deficit is what we call net debt, because you have to borrow it. That's what it is. So that has accumulated all this 11 trillion, 12 trillion that we are stuck with today. And so ultimately what happens is that then the little revenue that you collect, the 3.3 trillion, about half of it then goes into paying those debts, which are due, because you've collected this over years. And so you got into a vicious cycle where now you have no choice but borrow more again in order to finance this budget.
I have to ask about this 900 billion, Billow, just before we go to a break here. Is that so? If you say that your budget for you to do everything that you need to do in a fiscal year is 4.2 trillion, right? You say this is what we have available, 3.3. Okay, so you're looking for 900 billion. We also know that according to the law, you can only borrow for development, or you can borrow to meet in the short term a budget deficit. Now, does this fall into borrowing for a budget deficit? This 900 billion?
No, you see now, that's the way the figures are.
Yeah.
But in the numbers which are submitted in the official documents, you will not see the 900 billion.
What will you see?
The figures will be hidden in a number of ways.
Yes.
One, there are existing debts which are rolled over, which mature. This will be rolled over. So some of the 900 will be included in those ones which will be rolled over again. Some you'll be borrowing through domestic, and that one will specify. That will borrow 200 from the domestic market or something. Others will come through aid from people who are financing projects.
Yes.
They'll be put like external financing of some road or some project. So you will not see an actual figure saying that I'm going to borrow now 900. But so the law now, when you look at now compliance with the law, they'll tell you, look, as far as the law is concerned, we have only borrowed this amount. They will not. The other figures will not be considered as loans. And that's the way they get around the law. One
thing you said, Billow, is that yes, we're looking at the numbers, we're crunching, and we're saying, okay, this is what it means in the fiscal year ending July 2026. This is what to expect. The numbers are very important, but then more important is for us to talk about these things. That if we don't talk about them, that we're doing a disservice, first of all to ourselves, and then to the general public at large, in terms of what this actually means and how it affects you. And so that is actually part of citizen-based governance, to say that, look, we need to know exactly what's happening, because it's very easy to hide things in the mask of ignorance. You can hide it there because you know that people are not going to ask, people are not going to speak, people are just going to take it as it comes and fly with it. So now when we look at some of these things that could be concealed in the details, what are some of those things that we're probably going to have to I don't want to say look forward to in the next 12 months, or have the displeasure of experiencing when it comes to this new tax regime?
You see, look at the most common one that has been discussed by everyone. This moving quite a number of products in the pharmaceutical sector, in fertilizers and many others, from zero rating to being exempt from VAT. Simply put, what you are telling, what you are doing, the reason why you are doing that, because there's a reason why you are doing it. You're not just doing it because the word zero rating and exempt have no meaning. No, they'll tell you very smartly, look, there's no tax on exempt, and there's no tax on zero. There's nothing. There's no difference. That's what the government will tell you. When they want to be smart. But then, okay, if there's no difference, then why are you moving it from this schedule to the other schedule? It's because it has an impact. It has an impact. Because here, I am able to claim that input tax, that VAT on the raw materials that I import in order to make those products. On the other one, on the exempt one, I will not have that opportunity. So what they're saying then is they're avoiding, that because what it means, input means that if I am buying this phone, I am going to be sold this for 100,000 shillings, for example. Then the invoice will read 100,000 plus 16% VAT they'll charge.
Yes.
So if it is zero rated, that is what I'll pay. So that 16 now, if I am selling it again, I will also charge another 16% on it. So I will knock off my 16 on that out when I'm selling, with the other 16% that I paid when I was buying it. But now, when you're moving it to zero, I will not be able to do that offset. That's basically what it means. That I will charge you that 16% for them and pay them. But I will not be able to
You
offset.
can't recharge.
Yes. When it is 0, that 16 which I paid, I will not be able to offset. That's what it means on exempt. So they will get their 16. That's what it means.
But you won't.
But otherwise, they would have got nil because I would have offset between the two. Now they will collect the 16 straight. So it's a way of getting more revenue. And so now for me, I will still charge 16%. So my phone will still have the same price. So in fact, it will be more because, now I was getting 16 minus 16, I was getting 0. So now because I have to pay 16, I will now charge that 16 will be an additional fee that
so the original cost of the phone now you will say is 120,000 shillings, for example.
Exactly. And I'll now charge you 16% more on the VAT when I'm charging you. So the thing will be more expensive to you. So the government is getting their revenue. That's the main thing. But to you'll be paying more.
You learn something
Otherwise, because I would have knocked off the 2, I would have said, okay, I'll sell at 100. Because that 16 I was charged and recovered through the other 16.
So for purposes of clarity, Billow, and I think this is very important because I think today somebody has heard something that we've never really understood today. That when you say 0 rating, what that means is that you pay 16 when it is coming in terms of tax. And then when you sell the item, you can charge 16 on it, right? Now, when it's exempt, you pay 16, but when you say it's exempt from taxes, you cannot now charge 16 again. It cannot come in form of tax. But what usually happens is that people will now add it anyway on the cost of the item and not as a tax element. Am I right?
You see, anytime if you're a businessman, you're buying inputs, you're buying raw materials.
Yeah.
Those things have got taxes on them.
Yes.
If my products are 0 rated, I can claim that input, that extra tax which I paid when I was buying those things. But when it is exempt, I cannot claim.
Yes.
I cannot claim. So that loss of funds that I lost on that payment
is piled on you who are buying.
Yes, I'll put it on to the people who are buying. That's basically what it means. Yeah, so that's the cost that will be passed on. Of course, it's all up to the businessman.
So it's not a benefit to anybody, really. It's a benefit just to government.
To the government, yeah.
Yeah, of course. That's what I'm saying. If there was no benefit, they won't move it. The reason why they're moving it is they're avoiding that offset and they're going to get their VAT.
So the conversations around this bill, what areas are of a concern to you, or what areas should Kenyans really be concerned about?
For me, as a businessman, let me tell you. You see, everything that affects the businessman affects the common man, because eventually, what do businessmen do? They're producing products, services, and they're selling to people. So if they are going to be affected by any measure within the finance bill, it's going to affect you and me, everyone. So, for example, I'll give you a simple one, like VAT refunds. It's a major issue for businesses. For example, if you are in export, tea, coffee, flowers, and all these people who are doing exports, there are many Kenyans. When you are exporting anything, goods or services, it's supposed to be exempt from tax. You don't charge VAT. It's that's how you so, and the inputs you have been charged had VAT. So you claim VAT refund on that input based on certain formulas by the government, by treasury, by income tax, by the law. So what happens is now, government has not been refunding. The two people who suffer in business are people who was waiting for VAT refunds, and people who have got pending bills who have supplied the government for one reason or the other. So if you look at this finance bill, for instance, they have extended, when you are submitting your claim for a refund, you're supposed the treasury KRA does an audit. So they have extended the period for that audit, where the audit used to be done in, say, 3 months. Now they've extended it up to 6 months. That means it can take longer for your claims to be verified before it goes for approval for refund. The whole idea is to drag this thing so that the refund process is delayed. Already, as we speak now, for example, this year, it's one of the worst. From March, April, May, we are now in June, no refunds have been paid for VAT.
What are they doing with that money?
It's never happened in the history of this country, where in 3 months in a row, the government has paid 0 VAT refunds, to businesses. And so what does it mean? It means then if I don't have, it affects your cash flow. You're a businessman. You have billions that are outstanding for refunds, or hundreds of millions. So it affects you. So you're going to buy less products, you're going to manufacture less, you're going to produce less, you're going to do less service. So, and these are the same people who they want to collect more taxes from. So it's a kind of shooting yourselves in the foot. You don't want to pay the people who are generating the income. And it's all about meeting deadlines. You have targets. You've got 4.2 trillion, so everyone says no. If you take out something, and nobody wants to, and so I think those are some of the challenges. And apart from all these other ones relating to the moving these products, I think this will affect many industries. So some of those measures, they say administrative. Really, all of them have impact, one way or the other, on businesses. And ultimately, when business is affected, then it goes down to the people.
Kerrow, isn't the government shooting itself on the foot in terms of we want to collect more, we are adding more taxes, but in reality, you look at the refunds that you're talking about that you're not being paid, look at the pending bills that do exist, such that if the business is unable to churn more product to sell more, that means the government is collecting less. So isn't the government just making it the work difficult for itself to collect these taxes and move the economy anyway?
There are two things that the government of Kenya has done which has affected our economy. The reason why every Kenyan tells you the economy is bad, things are very tough. One, because government is one of the largest spenders in any economy. In any economy, is a major player.
Yes.
So that has a significant impact on the economy. When if government is buying things,
yes,
all these things, then you as a producer, you as a seller, you as a trader, there's a lot of money that will be in circulation. Second is, for those who supplied goods and services to government and have not been paid, it has a significant impact on the economy. How many people do you know who have supplied government, they have not been paid, they can't afford even lunch, they can't do anything, because they tell you, look, I'm waiting for the last 2 years, I've not been paid. The poor person. So, and this is affecting that person. They have, in fact, some have been forced to shut down their businesses. So those are two major areas. And the reason why the government is doing this is they tell you, our resources are limited, and we need to tax you guys more. If you want us to spend and pay those bills, we need to tax you more. But the issue is, they will never tell you that there's a lot of inefficiency in government.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wastage. There's a lot of mismanagement and misappropriation. When you look at all that, frankly, if I was the president of this country, I would not be taxing anyone. I'll just take a pen and pencil and go through that estimate, and you'll see how much money you can save through wastage in public service. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy.
And you say something that
we live large. There's no other. There was a time I went to Sudan, and I was surprised to see before the war, the minister is in a Toyota Corolla. That's the official car of a minister. You walk now in the morning when they're going to work. CS, there'll be, plus the chase cars, there'll be 3 Prados, and you saw in the media, in the reports of the auditors, that some CSs have up to 9 cars. And there was a time one had 12 cars. You remember a few years ago.
Yeah.
So we live, there's so much wastage in public service that they can save a lot of money. Why would you look for 40 billion? They can raise more than 40 billion from the estimates.
From the estimates,
yes.
They can.
Yeah.
You're told the finance bill is looking for 30 billion. You can raise much more than that if you really desire to go through that document.
So the Auditor General exists to essentially look at the spend on budgets. Control of budget says, fine, from the consolidated fund, you can spend 1, 2, 3 based on what we know is supposed to happen. So she gives the go ahead and spend. After that, the Auditor General comes in to give a report as an accountability holder for government, essentially. So is this the place whereby every year the monies that you have said you're going to spend versus the activities that you've actually engaged in find a place? Do we see shilling to shilling for what this budget, essentially, all this hullabaloo that we're creating around the budget, do we see shilling for shilling that it has been spent on the activities that have been budgeted for?
There's no, we have one of our budget, let me put it, let me not go into budget transparency. Let me put it this way.
Okay.
If you are in business and you've done business throughout the year and you've closed your financial year, you would then look at your performance, how it was. How much did we make? How much did we lose? What did we spend on? Where did we waste more money? And where can we save? And you look at your performance. In government, it doesn't happen. But the law provides for it. In fact, the law is so powerful that forget about waiting until the end of the year. The office of the controller is real-time audit of government. That's why it's called budget implementation. Every quarter, she submits a budget implementation report. In other words, how did we spend whatever was appropriated
this quarter?
This quarter. And that goes to Parliament. And the whole idea is so that Parliament can have a real-time discussion on the performance. And in addition to that, Parliament also gets expenditure review reports from Treasury, which is required by law to be submitted every quarter. So there is no waiting for the end of the year, so that you can say, okay, in real time, no, you can't spend this and you can't spend that. Forget about even the powers she has of saying, I can't approve this payment or you can't withdraw this money or whatever. But they give Parliament those reports on how the budget is progressing throughout the year. Then comes the audit at the end of the year afterwards and says, okay, this is how the performance was. This was misplaced, this was misappropriated, this was wasted, and this is the way this one was spent well, and they'll submit their report. So what is the whole idea? The whole idea is so that then Parliament can interrogate these reports and take action, remedial action, so that people must comply with those provisions of that law. And in fact, if you look at the Public Finance Management Act, you'll be shocked. There are over 30, 40 different offences for which penalties have been provided for and you'll be surprised. You'll rarely see any public officer or accounting officer who is being penalized for violation of Public Finance Management Act.
Why?
Because the Treasury, which has got the mandate really, doesn't bother. Because when Parliament submits adopts their whatever recommendations, Parliament will look at what the auditor says, and eventually they will do a recommendation and send it to the custodian of national assets, our custodian for public services. Everything is with the Treasury, and Treasury is supposed to then take some action really. But even forget about the Treasury. Even where there is clear theft of money that auditor has flagged, offices like DPP and other offices of government that are supposed to take action, they don't take action. So invariably, anyone in government, when it comes to public finance, if you are involved in any indiscipline or if you are involved in any misappropriation, chances of any action being taken is minimal. And if it happens, then it happens years later when you have left office. And that's why you find then someone gets taken to court, and then the level of conviction becomes very low and so forth. But the issue is not about conviction. The issue is if an officer has misappropriated money or spent money irregularly, which has not been provided for, Parliament should say, okay, sorry, next you're going to be sanctioned. If it's a CS, they can remove him. And they can also say, okay, we're not going to approve that budget for that ministry until that person is removed or whatever. They have powers, wide powers to deal with, but nobody can deal with that because of, obviously, political expediency. That's the challenge in this country. Everything is about politics. We have politicized every office, so you can't take action. And so this person will continue doing the same thing. Money has been provided for by the controller for you to put up this classroom, but they're going to divert it to something else. And the report is there that person has diverted that money, in that quarter to something else, and no action is taken. And the same person will come again next year. So, and last week she talked about, both the auditor and the controller talked about people spending money that have not been budgeted for.
Right.
A very, very common thing now. But, the law is very clear. That person should have been penalized immediately. But nobody takes action. No government office that is responsible takes action. But if you steal a chicken, you'll be dealt with.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And you see, you talk about something that has also been captured in this document, yeah? Because if you go on part 21 on expenditure reforms, the document says there is need for rationalization and reduction of non-essential expenditure. The government itself agrees that there is a wastage by its own staff on how they spend public funds. And here is now the question of the judicial system, the justice system not doing anything, those in charge, Parliament itself in terms of oversight not doing its job. So at the end of the day, you look at a budget that is at deficit, but even the little that we collect is being misused and no one really cares. So as Kenyans now participate and pour into their views in this budget making process, how do they ensure that this is actually dealt with? Because the bodies that are meant to do it, it's politics being played.
See, most of our budget speeches or budget statements or policy statements that come from Treasury are cut and paste. They're the same ones that are there for the last 20, 30 years. I mean, if you read any budget, go and look for the 2 or 3 budget occupiers.
Same thing.
Use the same word.
Thing.
Rationalization of public expenditure. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. Those lofty words are always there in the budget. But there's one office that, everything is about leadership, let me tell you. And I keep saying, whenever I talk about this thing, this is all about governance. So what about good governance? So it's all about the leadership. If the president, because everyone here is appointed by a president.
Yes.
That's why the Treasury CS cannot fire the accounting officer of agriculture if he brings in that fertilizer which has sand inside or whatever.
Yes.
He can't, because this guy is also appointed by the same person who appointed him. But if the president gives a commitment that in my administration I will not allow A, B, C, D, and he lives to that, these things will stop.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But where there is no penalty, then it will not stop. It will be the same. And that's the challenge we have in this country. It's all really about the leadership. It's all about governance.
I want to tie this a little bit into what we heard the president say yesterday. I actually tweeted about this as well. He said that for the first time, Kenya has reserves of $10 billion, $10 billion US dollars, and congratulated Treasury for actually being able to achieve this milestone, and said, the thing you're saying now, we've been crunching the numbers, we've been tightening the screws here and there, and that's how we've been able to put this money aside. A reserve of $10 billion is crazy, isn't it, Billow? Is it possible to have reserves of this amount of money whereby, number one, there's such high debt, number two, there's so many things that are undone that for which this budget that we're looking at now is actually supposed to have taken care of in years gone by? Would this be an artificial situation, or how would that work with all these conversations that we're currently having? You laugh.
2-3 years ago, when this administration came in, the issues we were discussing those days was the Forex. The exchange rate was crazy. It had gone to almost 168, because remember, and then there was a shortage. We couldn't find dollars. Businesses were complaining. Some of those macroeconomic issues that we were complaining about at the time, today they don't feature so much because they have been dealt with. I think, to give them credit, they did deal with some of those things. They did stabilize the currency down. All those things like the oil, fuel prices, and there were things that were significant at the time, and they've been dealt with. We give them credit. But you see, the Forex reserves is an essential thing for the purpose of what you're saying basically is, in any country, you need to have a certain amount of foreign currency to enable your businessmen to be able to import what they want to import. So we call it import cover. You need to have, like in this country, we always used to say we must have at least 3 months or 4 months import cover. So, and where you don't have those reserves, then you get into a situation where there's a crisis of the currency, and then there's a shortage in supply of currency, and then the rate goes up. And you remember what happened in 2021, 22 when that crisis. So I think what then they have done was using the monetary policy, the central bank. They were able to stabilize the Forex. What they do is they play around with on the interest rates, on through the monetary policy, so that the more if it becomes very expensive for you to borrow, then you will not borrow. If it becomes less expensive, so that what you are going to do is you reduce the amount of shilling in the market by making it very expensive for people to borrow. So they've been raising the interest rates and so forth. So it makes it more, that way, indirectly, then what you're doing is you're making the dollars to be more available. That's basically what they did using that monetary policy. But at the same time, the impact of it is now the interest rates becomes more high.
Yeah.
And so these are the same measures that are used for fighting inflation by governments.
Yeah.
So yes, they have very good Forex reserves, and that's why the shilling has stabilized, even with all the crisis of Trump and so forth. But you know, that does not necessarily. It's good for businesses, because now we don't have that crisis of the dollar, we don't have the exchange going crazy. You know, that's good for the businesses, and ultimately also for the people who will benefit, all of us in the country. But you see, for the ordinary Kenyan, is they don't see the benefit of all those things. If you announce, it's the businessmen who would understand. Yes, that's very helpful, and we are, at least then in the short term, the long term, we can say our currency is going to remain. I can plan.
Yes,
you know, using the today's rate of 130. That look, next year I can say maybe by December even 130. I can use that rate. So it's good for businesses. But for ordinary person, I think they are looking at
bread and butter issues.
Yes, and those the cost for you to get that, you have raised cost of finance for businesses, and so you have made things expensive. Don't forget.
That's how it has come about. Look, it's important for us to have these conversations, learning one or two things every day, and I think that's what you've been able to do for us today. Billow, Kerrow, economic analyst, has been here with us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. More about this, of course, in the near future. It continues. We still have to talk about it. It's important that we do.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.